I am Peter Thomas. I'm joined by Jim Blackburn here, who is the manager of LNG and Engineering Services at Eversource, stationed at Hopkinton LNG, right, Jim?
That's correct. Yep.
And how long have you been at Hopkinton LNG, Jim?
So I've worked for the company now for about 8 years. I've been in the energy industry for a little over 15. Um, I've been responsible for LNG really for the last 7 years for the engineering and project work associated with the LNG facilities that we own throughout New England.
That's great. Well, I really want to extend my thanks for sitting for this interview. I know you're aware, Jim, because you're in Hopkinton, that there are many residents who, particularly those living in legacy farms, who have many questions about the safety of the plant, and they're understandably concerned, likely because they don't know a lot about LNG, and that's your field of expertise. So we really do appreciate you taking the time to sit with us and help us understand the operational and some of the safety measures that are in place. In 2018, Eversource shut down Tank B for what you called a thermal anomaly.
Correct.
What was the problem and what fixed the thermal anomaly?
So Tank B was interesting. And actually, I think it helps us kind of talk confidently around the life extension of the three tanks. We identified a thermal anomaly, which really is a cold spot. So, as you look at the tank itself, the exterior of the tank, we're kind of mapping that to determine if there's areas that are maybe warmer or cooler than others, and that indicates, potentially internal issues. That's something we regularly do, and what we found was that we had a spot that was colder than other areas of the tank. Not immediately concerning. Seasonal conditions can kind of change things a little bit, but this was certainly something that was more than we had anticipated seeing or had seen previously. So we reviewed that. When we were able to get inside of Tank B, which is a pretty large effort, something that had not previously been done in any of our other tanks, and I think there's only one other facility in Massachusetts that had ever been done. We had an opportunity to get inside of a tank that had not been entered probably since the 70s. What we found there was actually very encouraging, related to the condition of the tanks. I mean, we found things such as writing on the walls from the original welders that had been working inside the tanks. So the conditions inside the tanks were as we had expected, and had been kind of suggested in some of the condition reports that had been done previously in 2012 and 2013 related to the life cycle of an LNG storage tank. We had the opportunity essentially to kind of confirm a lot of those things while going into the tanks, and really what we found was, at the end of the day, a whole lot of nothing inside the tank. We performed a lot of non-destructive examination and tank assessment. We took the opportunity while we were in there to make some substantial improvements to the overall design of the tank. You'll notice from probably the street that there's now probably some more equipment on top of the tank related to eliminating the side penetration on that tank. So now we are kind of a more modern design on now Tank B, and we had already done that on Tank C when it was originally built. So that was an improvement we took the opportunity to do while we were in there. All the examination that took place inside the tank confirmed that it was in great condition still. As far as the thermal anomaly, what ultimately we ended up doing was reinstalling the perlite insulation, which goes between the inner and outer wall of the tank. We redistributed that. We're able to fill in some voids that over time there had been some settling. We did find a temperature sensing device that had been, I guess, modified at some point in the life of the tank and seemed to have allowed for some amount of moisture to enter in a specific location where the thermal anomaly was. And we think that ultimately, one of the tank manufacturers that did the assessment ultimately concluded that was leading to that kind of the anomaly, the lower temperature condition in that specific area. So once that was corrected, ultimately we didn't find any leaks or anything else, and we found that the tank was in very good condition. That
So
was a long, drawn out answer to your question, but maybe more detail than you necessarily needed. But at the end of the day, we ended up finding, really, it was a minor correction. It just took a lot of effort to get there.
And so the then Hopkinton Fire Chief Steve Slayman wrote an article, sorry, a letter to the Mass DEP some 8 months later, saying that it had taken Eversource about 8 months to let the Hopkinton Fire Department know about this thermal anomaly. Why did Eversource not notify the fire department right away of this issue?
Yeah, so I think a lot has changed since 2019 with the relationship between the town and the company. I think we work a lot more collaboratively, and I think a lot of the work that we've done related to the liquefier project and ultimately Tank B later on helped to really reinforce that collaborative relationship. At the time, keep in mind the Department of Public Utilities, along with two other federal regulators, are really the groups that oversee the facility. And so, I think at the time, the plant management group had kind of we had this vision or this view that the DPU was really the group that we should be informing of these types of things as the regulatory agency. I think it was probably a mistake that we've kind of concluded in the long term that, we now are much more in tune with the kind of needs of the town related to informing them of things like this. And so I think we've corrected that the last couple of years. I think, if you were to talk to Chief Slammin on his way out and probably now Chief Miller, I think we work very closely, providing weekly updates on just even site construction activity. So, certainly that's a sin of the past that I think we've corrected more recently. And again, at the time, we didn't find that to be kind of an impending concern, maybe a concern, but not an issue that certainly would affect public safety. And so, we really saw that more as something for the company to work through with the DPU, not so much the fire department.
Are there any plans to bring the tank site up to current federal code? As you know, if this plant were built today, there would be a protective dike for each tank as opposed to one dike for all three tanks. Does Eversource have any plans to bring it near federal code?
Yeah, so what I would suggest is that's actually an incorrect statement. Federal code, which is 49 CFR 193, and then they pull into it NFPA, which is the National Fire Protection Agency 59A 2001 version, specifically does not require each tank to have its own containment. So that's an incorrect statement, something that I did want to address. What it specifically says is that each tank, if you're only going to have 100% containment, would require its own dike. However, if you've got enough containment for 110% of any of the largest tank, you only need to have one containment. And that's what we actually have here today. So while we do not necessarily strictly meet the modern code, we do actually comply with most everything that's required in modern day code. Now, there's certainly, some things because of the age of the facility that, probably don't distinctly fit into that category. But generally speaking, our tanks are not far from meeting all of the modern requirements. I know there was some conversation about the tank containment needing to be made of concrete. That again is not required by modern code. We do have a single containment at 110%, and so that today could be constructed just like that. And so, we really do. We are not far from complying with all the requirements of the modern code, and it's something that throughout the facility, the last since 2014, we as a company have slated and really are well beyond the 50% mark of investing more than $300 million into this facility and our Acushnet facility, most of those funds being allocated to this facility. So much of the investments that we're doing at site are bringing the overall facility up to kind of modern design, safety standards, and really overall trying to refurbish the facility to ensure that it's as safe and reliable as practically capable, so that we can utilize the facility to serve the overall region's energy needs, which this facility is a huge player as far as ensuring the economic price stability for natural gas to our customers.
But most of that, just to clarify, most of that 300 million went into the liquefaction factory, not the tank side of the
Certainly
plant.
not the tank side of it. Tank B was a very significant uh, expenditure. I want to say close to $20 million. The liquefier project is closer to about 180 million, and then I would say there's almost 100 million going into the rest of the facility, including the tanks.
And my understanding is that that money, it was approved that it would be passed on to the ratepayers.
Yeah, so that's essentially how this facility is operated. So, really the natural gas within these storage tanks are owned by the ratepayers, the Enstar gas customers. And so the cost associated with the facilities is then in turn forwarded to them as the price of gas to support that.
And when was the last time a seismic analysis was done of the tanks?
I couldn't answer that. I don't know that a seismic analysis, I'm not exactly sure, specifically what we're talking about, but what I would say is that on an annual basis, we do survey the tank specifically to confirm that there's been no changes to the tank foundation, the condition of the tank foundation, ensure that any of the seismic activity in New England hasn't in any way affected them. We've never had any concerns related to any of those findings. Really, we remain in good condition, all of our tank foundations. So
Moving on to tank rollover and the concept of tank rollover. So as material is added to the top of the tank, it's more dense than the material at the bottom because of the heat leak from the floor. And in other countries, LNG tanks have collapsed because of that. What measures does Eversource have in place to prevent tank rollover?
So I'm generally, I can't speak for international designs. I'm not aware of tanks collapsing because of that. If that happened, perhaps it was a singular case. What I will tell you, though, is the facilities in New England, while we're aware of and we certainly monitor, conditions that would result in tank rollover, it's not a condition that you really would expect to see in New England. The reason why is tank rollover happens from stratification of LNG or different densities of LNG being within the tank. While LNG is essentially liquid methane, certainly the overall quality of that methane can result in different densities. In New England, it's not so much of a concern as, say, a tank in Arizona or some other location that perhaps doesn't get cycled completely in a season. Many facilities throughout the country may not actually completely empty their inventories in a several season period. Our facilities generally, because of the New England winters and the reason we have these facilities, we cycle through most of our inventory every year. There's always a little bit remaining, but we generally fill and empty our tanks down to the heel almost every season. And when we don't do that, what we do is we'll take liquid from the bottom of the tanks and recycle it to the tops of the tanks to ensure that there's a good homogeneous mixture of the LNG within the tank. So rollover is not an issue that you see in the New England area. It's not an issue that you regularly see in industry. I'm not aware of any major, tank rollovers that have happened in the U.S. But it's certainly not something that we would anticipate seeing in New England. We're very much aware of it. We have monitoring of tank density in our this facility. So we do monitor tank density to ensure that there isn't a rollover condition being created. But again, because of the nature of our operation, it's not something that you would anticipate ever seeing here.
In a 2014 DPU hearing, representatives from Eversource said, quote, although the storage tanks and overall structure are in good condition, many major components of the HopCo facilities are reaching the end of their useful life. And then in testimony in 2021 for the appellate tax hearing where Eversource was seeking tax abatement, it read in quote, the Energy Supply Department at Eversource voiced concerns about the future reliability of the subject facility based on its age. And then there was a consultant Eversource brought in, Fuss and O'Neill, that said much of the infrastructure was designed for a life expectancy of about 40 years. So the tanks are approaching the end of their expected life. Now on the website that Eversource has created for the Hopkinton LNG plant, it says that the tanks are well within their operational lifespan. So how do you reconcile the testimony in front of the DPU and in front of the appellate tax hearing with that statement? Because the two are contradictory.
Yeah, so I think there's, kind of broadly, the Fuss and O'Neill report, which I think was done in 2013 or so, was really Eversource's beginning to review the facilities, both Hopkinton and Acushnet, to determine what types of investments would be necessary to uh, basically refurbish and modernize the facilities. And absolutely, uh, equipment like we have at the facilities, the industrial type equipment, typically has a design life of 30 to 40 years. However, specifically with storage tanks, life or age is not necessarily a good criteria to assess their ability to continue to serve reliably and safely. Really, it's thermal cycling of an LNG storage tank. So, if you think of a LNG storage tank as a thermos that you put on your countertop, that's very different than the refrigerator that's running in the corner that has a lot of mechanical pieces that are rotating and wearing. The LNG storage tank is a static piece of equipment. It doesn't have many moving parts associated with it, and so you don't anticipate there to be pieces wearing over time. LNG is non-corrosive. The tanks are made out of basically a stainless steel material. So internally, there's not much moving. There's really no moving parts to fail. The Fuss and O'Neill report really pulls into account a lot of plants. It pulls into account the entire plant facility, which includes the liquefaction equipment, which includes the send out system, all of which we've heavily invested in. So as you spoke to earlier, the liquefaction equipment has basically all been replaced. We're kind of in the commissioning phase of that, with the expectation that the existing equipment would eventually here be retired over the next few years, and then things like the flares that you see from legacy farms, eventually will go away here. However, the tanks themselves, they really remain in good condition. And there's a difference between the design life of a piece of equipment and the service life. And so as the design life starts to be reached, it's important to then assess the piece of equipment to determine if there can be a life extension associated with that. And if so, what is that? And so we'll continue to inspect the tanks regularly to ensure that they're operating safely and reliably and that they're in good condition. But really, the tank life is somewhat indefinite. It's somewhat has to be assessed continuously. Many other pieces of equipment, compressors and motors and that type of thing, we anticipate that those will reach a design life more in line with a period of time, and then they'll be replaced because they'll wear, they have those moving components. So, I hope that provides a little bit of context to it. But, just to assign age to a piece of equipment, particularly in the storage tanks, isn't a great way to really kind of assume their condition.
And you spoke about the air quality. The air quality permit on file with Mass DEP expired in 2017. Has the permit actually been renewed? And if
No,
so,
so yeah, so the way Mass DEP's air permit, at least with us, and is very common through many of their air permits, has an extension clause within it, section 15 or something. And within that, essentially what happens is the permit reaches its expiration period. Prior to the expiration, the company is required to submit a new application and any information necessary to renew that permit. That was done 6 months prior to the permit expiring, and so the clause within the actual permit itself says that the permit will continue to be enforced during the renewal process until Mass DEP issues a new permit or the company does not, renew that. So we did go through that process. We did submit the information. Unfortunately, Mass DEP, tends to have quite a few things going on, and getting permits in the past issued has been a slow process. But we do continue to operate the facility with an active permit. It did expire on that date. However, due to the clause within the permit itself, it continues to be in full force and effect.
And do you purposely send chemicals other than methane to the flare stack? Does anything else go but methane?
Yes. So as part of the existing liquefier, the refrigerants which are used to cool the natural gas and convert it into a liquid to store as LNG. Those refrigerants in the existing liquefier are ethane, pentane, and methane. So, sorry, ethylene, and propane. I apologize. Those during a plant upset have to be burnt so that they don't overpressurize the piping. Those do go to the flare. So when you see the flares, I think last year or a couple of years ago, there was a pretty large event where we burnt off those refrigerants during a plant shutdown. Those do go to the flare. Those are certainly result in kind of a scene that's more than just burning off of methane. The nice thing is, as we've presented to the town for the last few years, the new liquefier will eliminate those 16,000 pounds of flammable refrigerants, and instead the new liquefier, which is located across the street, utilizes nitrogen. So when we have a shutdown of the new system, we'll vent nitrogen to the roof. Nitrogen obviously makes up the majority of the atmosphere that we breathe, and we'll vent safely. So we won't have that same flaring type of vents in the future, so we'll be eliminating that. We certainly, with the new equipment, have significantly improved on the types of emissions controls that are associated with the new equipment. So, as soon as we are able to finalize commissioning of the new equipment, the new liquefier, and get away from the old liquefier, there certainly will be a significant improvement in the plant's overall kind of emissions.
Do you ever find any PCBs in the input stream that goes to the flare stack? I know PCBs are used as a lubricant for compressors and it's fire resistant. If
Yeah.
so, how do you destroy that?
So we don't. So we get very little oil into the feed gas stream of this facility. In fact, we removed the old coalescer filter upstream several years ago, and I think in the life of that had, I think the comment from the operations group is perhaps they had removed a teacup's worth of oil from it. We don't specifically test for PCBs coming in because we don't have it's clean. What I will tell you, however, though, is when we remove piping at the facility, and actually any gas piping throughout the Commonwealth, we typically swab for PCBs. In the Hopkinton area, and specifically at this facility, I've never had a project come back where the piping that we swabbed had any signs of PCBs. So, I can't specifically answer that because no, we don't test for it. But what I can tell you is when we have tested for PCBs and the piping that would contain it, we've never found it in Hopkinton. This area just does not have that entrained in the gas.
And speaking of safety, initially when the plant was built, there was a fire mitigation system installed that stored about 20,000 gallons of aqueous firefighting foam on site. As you know, AFFF contains PFAS. PFAS is a big problem in this town, and a lot of people are thinking about that and concerned about that. Did Eversource ever replace the PFAS foam with an organic foam?
Yeah, so we've actually never had a PFAS foam on site. So we use an Ansell product. We've been talking to the fire department about this for probably about 4 years now. It's something we've been very transparent with, but the foam that we've had on site has never been a PFAS containing foam as far as we're aware. So the product that we use here is non-PFAS containing, and fortunately that's something that we were aware of very early in kind of the whole PFAS concerns that have been brought forward. Mass DEP and EPA are certainly pushing out some very stringent guidelines and thresholds lately. But we believe that we've actually never had that as an issue here. So fortunately, it's something that we've been able to avoid.
Is the control room a survivable structure in the case of a major fire, or would operators have an incentive to leave to save their own life?
That's an interesting question. So as we build our new facilities, we do siting analysis to determine that type of criteria. We've never done that for the existing facility. What I will tell you is, as a company, we've started to really recognize the need to establish really my engineering group and the rest of the operations group from a central location here in Hopkinton. We've kind of coalesced around this Hopkinton facility. A lot of our work is here. So we actually, we haven't presented anything to planning board or the other, departments We have talked about it informally a little bit with the town manager and the fire chief, but we have intentions of replacing the existing control room here at Hopkinton. And through that, not only would we replace the control building or the control room, but that would include administrative areas and office areas for our folks. So we're really trying to coalesce around the Hopkinton facility and location since it's very central to the rest of our facilities. And that certainly would take into account any type of scenario. The operators would be very much located outside of the process areas itself. The existing control room, we have, measures in place, and quite honestly, if we had to abandon the facility, the control room, we have means of shutting down the system safely and allowing it to bring itself kind of to a controlled state. And we have the ability to still see some of the process stuff remotely from another control location. So.
And my understanding is that LNG boils faster over water than it does land, and that current regulations require there to be no standing water inside of the protective dike. But when I drive by the plant and look to my left, I can see a pool of water there. So is there a sump pump system running to pump that water out? And if so, why is there standing water?
Yeah, so there is a sump pump. I think what you're referring to is, for LNG tankers, there's certainly a concern that if an LNG tanker, a ship going, a ocean going ship containing LNG, if there was a spill from that, being over the body of ocean, a body of water of significant size, certainly the LNG would vaporize much quicker as it would have a heating source, being the ocean. That's not really what we're talking about in a containment. So we have an obligation to maintain our containments generally free of water. Certainly, being an earthen containment, you'll always have some amount, a little bit of puddling in there. But for the most part, our containments are essentially evacuated. We go out during rainstorms and such and visually inspect before we turn on the pumping system. But we do maintain the containments, generally with little to no water inside of them. I won't say there won't be a standing puddle, in an area as large as that, over an acre. I think there's certainly bound to be a small standing puddle, but you shouldn't ever see that containment full. And certainly a small amount of water like that, if there was an LNG spill on it, yeah, it'll generate a little bit of vaporization initially, but it will freeze over as well. And then at that point, it basically becomes inconsequential.
Well, my final question, Jim, is about a solar project that at one point Eversource proposed to place between Legacy Farms North and Rafferty Road. It would have been placed inside of the vapor exclusion zone. Do you know if Eversource has continued plans to put a solar farm there, or has that project been abandoned?
Yeah, so I think that while the company was reviewing opportunities to, add solar panels, I guess, to the property we own across the street there, the facility itself was pretty vocal on not wanting that. From our perspective, both the visual aspect of having trees along with the ability for trees to provide mitigation to any type of vapor dispersion. Those are all things that are important to us. So we've pushed that away. As far as I'm aware, there's no intentions of that coming back. Certainly our group is not supportive of that. And so we don't, I haven't heard anything of it in the last couple of years. I think that's kind of died in the vine and moved on.
I said I had one last question, but I actually have one more question, and thank you so much. Sure. The street, so, as residents are aware, the tanks are on one side, the liquefaction factory is on the other, and Wilson Street, a public roadway, goes right through it, which is a very unusual design for an LNG plant. Has Eversource ever asked the town to try to suspend traffic through that area, redirect it, or mitigate it in some way, just given the clear security risk that presents?
So it's interesting you bring that up. I think we all would agree that that's somewhat unusual. It had to do with kind of the construction of the facility before Eversource took over. We at one time had informally had some conversations about what it would take for the company to assume responsibility for that road and then redirect traffic from where the old Serenity House was, which is a property that we purchased a couple years ago. If we could redirect traffic up to Legacy Farms through that area. At the time, I think, that kind of goes back to before the company and the town were maybe so collaborative. It didn't seem like it was going to get much traction. And so instead, what we did is we did kind of increase some of the measures around the pipe crossing. I think it's important to recognize that the pipe crossing is probably most consequential in folks' minds because of the LNG flowing under there. The liquefier project basically reduces that by almost 200 days. So throughout the year, we essentially have eliminated with the new liquefier about 200 days of LNG flowing through that pipe. You still will continue to have that during certain portions of the year during vaporization, but you're talking about maybe a dozen to a couple dozen days per year. So we've significantly reduced that. I think there's things that we've also talked with the town about, maybe placing some more anti-vehicle structures in those areas. I think those are things that are still being considered. But we do think that the existing crossing is adequately protected. We have fencing, we've got anti-vehicle barriers in place. You can absolutely see, certainly walking by or driving by, you can see all that infrastructure. But there's a difference between being able to see it and being able to contact it with some type of a vehicle to do harm. So we do think we have anti-vehicle barriers in place that adequately protect it. But I think in the long term, certainly there's things that, we would consider working with the town collaboratively to kind of make for changes there if possible.
I'd like to give you the opportunity to let residents know your perspective on the safety and continued operation of the plant, just to close this out. What would you say to residents about the basic safety of an LNG plant that is so closely located to so many residences?
Yeah, I would suggest that this facility is not unique compared to many other facilities. There's plenty of facilities that are, within residential locations within cities. We have other facilities that are within city locations. We, as a company, have significantly invested in the LNG facilities themselves to modernize them. We have a large group of folks, who are professionals, both on our compliance and regulatory, our plant operations and maintenance groups, and then the engineering groups that really support these facilities. As a company, we put a lot of effort into the several facilities we own in Massachusetts, and Hopkinton probably being the one that's received the benefit of the most of that. We take safety very seriously. All of our designs and engineering are thoroughly reviewed, both internally and with third parties. We have implemented a lot of processes and procedures that kind of go above and beyond the requirements necessary by federal code for LNG facilities. I think we take a lot of pride in what we've done at these sites to improve, and I think we generally try to do the right thing. I've expressed that to the planning board and other members, other boards and members of the community. We do put a lot of effort into ensuring that we're good neighbors. And I think the last few years, I think we've been able to demonstrate that we've improved a lot of things at this site, improved communications, and overall began to modernize the facility. I think we've done a lot here that folks in the company are proud of. So we hope that that's recognized. We work here, generally, most of us every day. And so, we spend a lot of our day here, and it's important to us that the facility is safe as well to all of our employees. So I think we have many of the same desires as the neighbors do to have a safe and reliable facility, and I think we do that well. So
well, I want to thank you very much for your time today, Jim, and for participating in this process so that Hopkinton residents can go to sleep at night knowing that Eversource shares some of the same concerns they do, and that they're putting their economic shoulder behind it. So thank you very much for spending your time with us today.